reality is, you look at the way that Trump's America has effectively destroyed the international rules-based order. Trump's America has voted alongside Russia and Belarus against the European Union in the United Nations against a motion condemning Russian aggression in Ukraine. Trump's America stated categorically at the Munich Security Conference under Hegseth, the defense secretary, that America is not going to underwrite European security. How can we rely on America to underwrite NATO's Article 5 and the doctrine of collective defense?
So, Richard, the NATO summit this week was declared historic the moment the alliance went back to its roots, functioning as a collective defence system to deter Russia, or so said the Finnish president. What was your takeaway? Did this strike you as a strong, unified alliance?
No, I think it was pretty underwhelming, if I'm honest. It was I can see why politically they had to say that. Because the entire political European leadership of NATO is terrified that Trump is going to walk away. But the reality is that this was a groveling kowtow to a president across the pond who is not in any way committed to NATO and who would walk away from NATO at a moment's notice, and indeed has already demonstrated that he's in bed with Russia, that he is a pro-Putin sympathizer, he cares not a damn for Ukraine, and he will look after his interests and forget about the alliance. So I'm afraid I don't think it met the requirement. There was no recognition at all of the existential threat that Russia's war in Ukraine is posing not only to Ukraine but to Europe as a whole. No recognition of the ongoing covert war against Europe by Russia. No recognition of the need for Europe and the alliance to really step up to the mark to do what needs to be done to achieve peace and security long term in Europe. And it was and then of course the much trumpeted 5% of GDP. Oh, by 2035. I mean, I'm sorry, it doesn't stack up.
So my next question was going to be, because of that 5% pledges to be spent on defence and security, is Europe finally stepping up? I guess the answer is no, and certainly not quick enough.
No, it's not. I mean, let's go back to the NATO summit 2014 in Wales, when NATO members agreed to move to 2% of GDP within 10 years. 11 years later, we're not even there yet. There are a number of NATO nations that are not spending 2% of GDP on defense. A number have just scrabbled across the start line, as it were, before this NATO summit, 11 years late. Look at this country. We have, where is the money going to come from? You've got a Labour government that is threatened with a rebellion by Labour backbenchers because of minimalistic welfare reforms, which might have been able to transfer a bit of money into defence. But even that is unlikely. So I'm afraid the 5% within 10 years is cloud cuckoo land. What is needed is 5%. Come on, we've got to hold people's feet to the fire on this.
You mentioned all the things that were not in the final communique, which you believe should have been. Obviously, presumably they were not there because the whole intention was to keep Trump engaged from walking away from the summit and to actually keep him on board with NATO. If that was the necessary evil, perhaps it was worth it.
I would love it if we could say after the summit that we have total confidence that if a NATO member was attacked, Trump would come to the aid of it under Article 5. We cannot have that confidence. Yeah, he was there in person-ish, but the reality is, you look at the way that Trump's America has effectively destroyed the international rules-based order. Trump's America has voted alongside Russia and Belarus against the European Union in the United Nations against a motion condemning Russian aggression in Ukraine. Trump's America stated categorically at the Munich Security Conference under Hegseth, the defense secretary, that America is not going to underwrite European security. How can we rely on America to underwrite NATO's Article 5 and the doctrine of collective defense?
Well, and yet the statement from the summit, it did say right at the top, reaffirmed the alliance's ironclad commitment to collective defence enshrined in Article 5. I mean, you could say, for now, it's drawn a line under that hesitancy that Donald Trump actually expressed on his way over to the summit. Or do you actually think those words have done lasting damage and further encourage our adversaries to put it to the test?
That statement of the ironclad commitment to Article 5 and collective defense is only worth anything if the means and the will is there. Europe has not, and it seems to be still faffing around, incapable of generating the means. And America has demonstrated, again, through its actions and its words, that is a hollow statement. And if I were Putin, I would be sitting there thinking, firstly, I think I would be thinking that Rutte's display of fawning cringing to Trump demonstrates not strength but total weakness. I would be thinking that I've got NATO where I want it because America is effectively decoupled from European security, and that Trump has gone some way to undermining NATO by his words and his actions. And I would be thinking I might just have a go at one stage when I'm ready at maybe one of the NATO countries in the Baltic states, for example. Because what would change my mind is if I had seen strong words from NATO leaders stating, America, either you're in or you're out. Meanwhile, we are going to double down and do what is absolutely necessary, make the sacrifices necessary to shore up our defenses alone and assume we cannot rely on you, to Europeanize NATO. We've had nothing of that. What we've had is this desperate attempt to paper over the cracks, to try and keep Trump on side, to produce a minimalist communique, a NATO summit light, because the attention span of Trump is so minimalist that he can't cope with anything rigorous and serious. And it just demonstrates weakness, not strength.
How much damage is being done by the prolonged and protracted talks about having talks to end, to bring about a ceasefire? Because we've had it only just like yesterday from Donald Trump saying, "Oh, I'm going to talk to President Putin again." How much damage is that doing to actually European allies of Ukraine coming up with their strategic thinking, their strategic plan?
Again, what it does is just play Putin's game, and Putin is playing Trump, because Trump is. There will not be peace in Ukraine, as I said earlier, until Putin recognizes Ukraine as a sovereign state and the Ukrainian constitution. And that's never going to happen unless Putin is brought up, absolutely stopped short in Ukraine, and recognizes that he will never achieve success there. I think my own view is that that's never going to happen while Putin is in power. And that's the challenge that we face in the West.
Zelensky, he's also claiming that the war in Ukraine is actually serving a purpose in so much as it's slowing President Putin's efforts to build Russia's capabilities. It's wiping out its personnel on the battlefield, and that in 10 years' time, there's going to be a completely different story, and he'll have another army ready. Do you think that message is getting through to NATO?
I don't think it is. If it was, we would have seen a resounding declaration of the threat Russia poses and the need to support Ukraine, defeat Russia in Ukraine in this recent NATO summit.
So you genuinely think then, despite Donald Trump's positive experience of the NATO summit for himself, that it hasn't opened up any new window of opportunity or persuaded him to refocus on Ukraine, irrespective of the fact that there was this kind of moving moment where a reporter, wife of a Ukrainian soldier, talked at a press conference to Donald Trump and basically got him to say that he would consider selling more Patriot missiles to Ukraine. Is that just like one of those things that he says and is not taken seriously? Or do you think perhaps the personal touch does get through sometimes?
Well, let's see. Let's see if anything happens. Let's see what military aid Trump's America now starts doubling down on to give Ukraine. You might forgive me for being a bit cynical on this one, but I don't think it's going to happen.
Can we just briefly talk about the Senate confirmation hearing of his nominee for Supreme Allied Commander Europe, Lieutenant General Alexis G. Grinkovich? He said at that confirmation hearing, I think Ukraine can win. I suppose, yes, it can if it's given what it's needed to win. But when you assess the current battlefield situation, isn't it a question of who is actually just losing the slowest?
Saka designate is absolutely right. Ukraine can win, and that's a hopeful sign from the other side of the pond. Firstly, it's very, very good news that America has appointed a new Saka to replace the current incumbent. Yes, Ukraine can win, and it needs the sort of strategic thinking that I've been talking about. So that is also good news. Is Ukraine losing? No, it's not. But is it winning? No, it's not. Equally, Russia is not winning, but it's not losing. And the key thing here is to continue to keep Ukraine in the fight. And Ukraine has demonstrated in abundance its maneuver, its agility, its ability to really hit hard at Russia. The good example was the Spider's web attack on the strategic bomber fleet of a few weeks back. I've absolutely no doubt that there's more of that in the pipeline. And this is not going to take what it is going to take is more of that tied to the sort of thing we saw in Kursk last year from Ukraine, tied to making Crimea impossible for the Russians to hold on to. And this again brings us back to what Europe and Canada need to be doing to support Ukraine.
What are the chances, do you think, that Putin's Russia will be a greater threat to NATO when the war with Ukraine is actually over than it is now?
It depends on the conditions the war ends in. If it is defeat of Russia, the first point is that we have to assume that Russia will never give up its intent to remove Ukraine from the map as a sovereign state. So even if there is recognition in Russia that they have to come to the table and agree a peace deal, assume Russia will attack at some stage in the future. And that means a deal has got to be imposed on Russia that says Ukraine's joining NATO. NATO is going to back Ukraine to the hilt. And if necessary, put planes in the skies above. If necessary, troops on the ground. Actually, Ukraine doesn't need any of that because they've got plenty on their own. But do all the things that would make Ukraine secure as a NATO ally and to reinforce that the importance of collective defense. And that means NATO has got to look to a future of continuing to deter against a Russia that is always going to be on the lookout to repeat what it's tried to do in Ukraine.
General Sir Richard Shirreff, great to speak to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kate.
You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Chabot. If you'd like to be the first to get exclusive content, you can sign up for membership with the link below. You can also listen to Times Radio for the latest news or read it on thetimes.com.